Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 18th chapter in the book of Job. Here, and we hear from Bildad the Shuhite for the second time. This is on the second round of the dialogues which are exchanged. So the first dialogue begins with Job's first speech in the third chapter, and then it ends with his fourth speech. He responds to the three comforters who are identified in the 11th verse of the second chapter, and he responds to each one. They each present in the order in which they themselves are presented. So we hear from Eliphaz the Temanite, and then Bildad the Shuhite, and then eventually Zophar the Naamanite. And they are their own men with their own minds. They have their own creative input. They're certainly fluent in the language of piety, but they all say essentially this. They all make the same argument, if not say the exact same thing, shall we put it. So their argument is they preserve, uphold, and maintain that God is perfectly just, which of course he is, but they also insist that the justice on earth is a reflection of the heavenly justice. So all the ones who suffer are suffering because they sin. All those who are prosperous and live long life and in health, that they are that way because they are righteous. Therefore, Job could only have sinned in order to invite this suffering. But the truth is that none of them, not even Job, only the reader, is privy to the dialogue which precipitated the calamities in the first two chapters. But they all reflect their wisdom on earth. And Job says many times, I understand you, but it doesn't make sense because my experience so clearly invalidates the premise of your suggestion that I am suffering because I sinned. And we hear from Eliphaz. He launches the second round. The second time we hear from him in the 15th chapter, then 16th and 7th is Job's fifth speech. We're going to review the 17th before we get into the 18th. Opening verse, my spirit has been broken, my days have been extinguished, graves are for me. To be broken in spirit is to have no life, no vitality, no sign of hope, no expectation, nothing to look forward to. He is broken and dejected in every sense of the word, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And he feels prepared for death. He invites death. He not only curses the day he was born, not only wishes for death, but wishes he had never been born. Fourth verse, for you have hidden their heart from understanding, therefore you do not exalt them. So the dialogue does get a lot more personal in the second round. Now the three friends of Job are frustrated because of Job's inability to accept their arguments at face value, and so they start taking it personal. But Job also, he attacks them too here. The you who has hidden their heart. Now the things of the Spirit are known by the Spirit, and apart from him we can have no knowledge of anything. So he's saying that you up there have hidden their hearts from understanding. And don't exalt them, don't continue to prosper them. See who denounces friends for a share, even the eyes of his children shall fail. So these three men were Job's friends. They were fair weather friends. They are seemingly hostile enemies. They are their argumentativeness. Once his wealth and prosperity and health had left him, they didn't have anything to gain financially or otherwise, but they are invested in their argument that it must be true, else what happened to Job could happen to them. And eventually Yahweh vindicates Job for speaking correctly and rebukes these three friends. But there is a lot of good stuff in their dialogue. Verse 7, and from sorrow my eye has grown dim, and from all my members are like shadows. So he's crying. He's literally crying. He's in pain, searing pain. He has skin boils head to toe, and he lost his health, his wealth. Who wouldn't cry if you had 10 children and lost them all on the same day, all at once? And so he has every right and reason to be mournful and sorrowful. And he's physically depleted. His body is a shadow of its former self. So he had once known what it's like to be healthy. And then he resorts to sarcasm in the 8th and 9th verse, somewhat justified in his case. Sarcasm is the way of the scoffer, but there is such a thing as sincere and legitimate sarcasm. But then the 13th through 15th verse will close on that. If I wait, the grave is in my house. I shall make my bed in darkness. Once more, Job is prepared for death. He invites death. He's just ready to go over the door. All he asks previously is for one blissful moment where all the pain is away so he can enjoy his last breath of life before he goes down to Sheol. I shall say to corruption, you are my father. To the worm, you are my mother and my sister. Corruption is synonymous with death in this context. Our body corrupts and we die because we corrupted our moral agency during the fall. Adam did for us, and since then we are sinners. We are born sinners, not by choice, but by nature. Although each and every sin is a choice, we do not choose, even if we could will, even if we could will to be sinless, we could not do it because we are sinners by nature and not by choice. Even when we become born again, we choose to look at sin a different way, and we appreciate it and anticipate it, but we still succumb in that way. But worm food is the destiny of the physical body. It decays and perishes and sinks into the ground. From dust we are made, to dust we will return, and our bodies will become worm food. And Job feels perfectly at home with death and the worm. You are my father, you are my mother and sister. He feels that this is his family. This is where he belongs. Where then is my hope? As for my hope, who would see it? To his credit, Job does express a messianic hope in the 19th chapter, but right now he's feeling hopeless and helpless, not for the first and certainly not the last time. We cannot blame him for his state of hopelessness. The only thing he can do is look beyond his present circumstances, and he does have faith that he would be vindicated in a heavenly court. But he's just ready to die and throw it all in and throw in the towel. Now, Bildad takes the initiative. This is for the second time we hear him, and he opens in much a similar way as he did in the 8th chapter, the first time we heard from him. 18th chapter, first verse, book of Job. And Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, so same thing I do every time. How would you anticipate you would answer were you in his shoes? And we would think that if we saw a fellow sufferer in need, that we would have some empathy, some compassion, and, some humanity. A fellow suffering in need doesn't need critical judgment, baseless, meritless accusations. But Job's friends, they are pious, but they are self-righteous. They don't want to have anything to do with a self-righteous person will not deign to sink their hand to lift up the sinner. So that's somewhat of a preview what we said. If you've read the earlier chapters and you've been watching these, you have an understanding of what their basic attitude and approach is to this argument of theirs. When do you put an end to words? Understand, let us then talk. He says the same thing. The first time we hear from him, he accuses Job of having endless words. He's speaking in vain. He's saying a lot, but not really saying a whole much. His words are empty. And Job says the same thing in the 3rd verse in response to Eliphaz. Is there an end of words of wind? So his words have no substance. They are fleeting. They are flickering. They have no value. And he wants to this debate of theirs is stuck in a stubborn stalemate where Job will not relent from his insistence that he is innocent. And what we have between Job and the 3-on-1 is an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. But he's saying, understand and let us talk. So in other words, hear me out, and then say what you say should be shaped by what I say to you. I want my argument to register to you. And he knows he's going to answer to him, but he wants, to really listen and pay attention. Why should we be reckoned as beasts, as stupid in your eyes? So Job accuses them of ignorance. Ignorance of divinity. He did not invent the charge in this debate. It was originally inflicted by him, by one of his miserable comforters, as he calls them in the second verse of the 16th chapter. So they're both accusing each other as being ignorant, but they also attack the arguer. They seldom attack the argument. It's one thing to say an end of words. You're not really saying a whole lot, but you're not dissecting the argument. You're attacking the arguer and not the argument. And they demand the dignity of being recognized as wise, wiser certainly than the beast. And, their wisdom, they're taking it personally that he is not accepting and embracing their counsel, which isn't very comforting and isn't very strengthening, certainly isn't uplifting, certainly isn't healing, and certainly isn't friendly. You would tear yourself to pieces in displeasure. Would the earth be forsaken for your sake, or the rock move from its place? So he's accusing Job of magnifying himself to the center of the universe. And in Job's defense, when you are in pain, it is extremely difficult to think about anything else besides the pain, far less other people. So we should. It's realistic to that doesn't make Job wicked. It just makes him human. But would the earth be forsaken for your sake? Is your life, your health? None of our lives are necessary, and certainly the life of the earth isn't dependent on our lives. We come and go. The earth will see us come and go, and the earth will remain in station. We cannot manipulate it. We are frail creatures of dust. We are tiny dots on a tiny pale blue block in the universe. So we have to submit to the sovereign control and command and rule of the supremely sovereign one. Indeed, the light of the wicked goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. So the cause of death is wickedness. Wickedness can cause death to expire, a human life to expire prematurely. That is essentially what he is saying. It is an oversimplification to suggest that the righteous are automatically entitled to live longer than the wicked. Poor old Abel, as early as the 4th chapter of Genesis, invalidates the premise of that suggestion. But he's also suggesting that their vitality, the flame in their fire, does not shine even when they're walking the earth and having life. They are destined for death, and they invite it through their own wickedness. The light shall be dark in his tent, and his lamp beside him is put out. So not only is he a lightless lamp or a vessel without luminosity, just not functioning as it should, he has no light, which is analogous with life. And, so when he's in the tent, he's not going to have, there's no other source of light that can illuminate such a creature enraptured in darkness. And that is just analogous to confusion, doubt, and ignorance in the earthly context, but death in the permanent or eternal. The steps of his strength are impeded, and his own counsel overthrows him. Consequence of wickedness does not pay a price by this, because your strength is going to be used against you. You're going to, and by your strength, you're going to invite your own traps and deceptions. He uses hunting terminologies in the next 2 verses. But you're not, your own advice, your own best thinking will land you in trouble, and our own best thinking was the source of many of my calamities. So own counsel, if you rely on your own counsel, trust in Yahweh with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, Proverbs 3:5. Because your own counsel is going to overthrow you, not necessarily if you're wicked, just if you are not submitted to the counsel of the omniscient one. For he is sent into a net by his own feet, and he walks on a pitfall. This paradox of a sinner falling trapped to their own devices is communicated in the Psalms and the book of Proverbs. These belong in the Old Testament genre of wisdom literature. So wickedness is what is communicated in all those books, does not pay its own price. It is self-defeating. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. You lay a trap, eventually your foot's going to get caught in it. You're going to be ensnared by your own devices. So a net and a snare are 2 different things for devising. A net is what fish are caught with, but also some wild animals in the forest, perhaps. And a snare is something that is enticing and alluring and deceptive, but it's really a trap. So it invites animals in, usually under the faulty premise of free food, but then they get their leg caught in the bear trap and whatnot. A noose is hidden on the ground for him, and a trap for him on the path. Two more hunter terminologies, a noose and a trap. A trap would have been just a physical device that would have trapped anyone who set foot in it. If you get a bear in a trap, then the bear is at your mercy. And a noose, we commonly associate these with human hangings. The noose is the rope, but it's also useful for cattling. You know, you throw a noose around them. The circular rope, and it has all the same physical marks and characteristics as something we would hang ourselves with were we suicidally inclined or even homicidally inclined towards someone else. But, you know, then the once more it is communicated that the wicked are defeated by the very devices they employ, in what is the lesson that we may profitably extract when waging war for righteousness, is that the evil one and evil forces themselves can never be defeated by the devices that they employ. The fire of hatred can only be extinguished by the water of love, and the temptation and the difficulty is to reciprocate hate and vengeance, and just to seek an eye for an eye and then some. That is the natural man, but that just perpetuates. And I think there is some truth into the Hindu thinker Mahatma Gandhi, that the eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. That is not to diminish the righteousness of the principle of lex talionis in the Mosaic covenant, but if you're commonly pursuing vengeance, it is an act of faith to cede vengeance to the one whose justice is better than ours. It is also difficult because it demands patience. He doesn't always act, and he might not act in our lifetimes, but all rights will be wronged in the final day of judgment. Alarms frighten him on all sides and chase him at his heels. Being governed by fear, just at seemingly the blowing of a wind in a leaf in the wind is enough to cause the covenant violators in Leviticus to the wicked flee when none pursue. So that's a cause and consequence. You're going to be governed by irrational fears on all sides. So this is not just wherever you go, you're going to be surrounded by fear. You're going to be imprisoned by fear, because fear is a consequence of the original fall. Fear was a hitherto unprecedented emotional experience in the Garden of Eden until they lost the covering, or Adam and Eve lost the covering of God, and they fled from fear. And Yahweh comes down and says, Adam, where art thou? And, you know, you can run, but you can't hide from, and you can't run for very long. But fear is necessary and natural. Now, fear is not sinful to have fears. It's not cowardly to not want to put your finger over a bowl of boiling fire. But fear is alternately a rational response to a real danger or an irrational response to a perceived danger. And the imagination is the coward's worst enemy, because they are governed and controlled by fears with little dangerous potential that they ascribe to it in their own imagination. His strength is starved, and calamity is ready at his side. Calamity would have been a sensitive subject, and Job was certainly starved of strength. He was physically depleted. He was emotionally, his morale was low. His sense of self-worth and self-esteem completely vanished and obliterated. And calamity was an understatement, because we who read the book of Job literally have no emotional, experiential precedent or relatable thing, because to have everything and to lose it all at once, and by everything we mean everything, 10 children gone, 7,000 livestock, or ever how many he had of the livestock and cattle gone, and then his health evaporates with the presence of skin boils, and that leads into the next verse. It devours parts of his skin. The firstborn of death devours his part. So Job was devoured by not only parts of his skin, but he had terrible, ugly, unseemly boils, painful and sickly ones from head to toe, and he didn't do anything to deserve it. It was just Satan spread that sickness to him. And so sickness is, in some sense, the firstborn of death. Sickness leads unto death, and if it is not attended to, then it will grow worse and worse. So medical intervention is necessary whenever there is sickness, lest it consume and devour the whole being, the whole body. Cancer in any part of your body can eventually kill you. So if it's in the hand or the breast or anywhere else, it really doesn't matter. He is torn from the shelter of his tent, and they parade him before the king of alarms. This is something Job could have and was probably meant to be taken personally. He was torn from the shelter of his tent. He had houses which his children visited. The houses for his children, they all instantly collapsed. Job was homeless, hopeless, helpless, and broke, and all he had was his faith and integrity, and he was determined to maintain that even in the midst and the face of all this loss, and he's struggling to make sense of it, and he somewhat subscribes to a similar theological. Now, none of them mention Satan, so they seem to think that everything that is the working of the Almighty One. So sickness is an expression of his wrath, and whereas Job's sickness was sent by the evil one. But he was paraded before, his friends, certainly. It was 3 against 1, and his friends weren't very, very friendly. His comforters weren't very comforting, and his counselors were offering no strengthening, uplifting, healing, or useful counsel. In his tent dwells that which is none of his. Brimstone is scattered of his house. So he's a thief. He has nothing to call his own. This is the consequence of wickedness. So if you are wicked, you will be reduced to a life of thievery, which usually begins with a single act of stealing by the extreme interpretation of this. But brimstone brings reflections of Sodom and Gomorrah. That is the classic case of fire and brimstone, an ancient epicenter of iniquity, totally vanished and instantly evaporated because there were not 10 righteous left in it. So whenever we see brimstone comes through in the book of Revelation, we have ample warnings, some of which include the word sulfur and brimstone. So sulfur is the physical gas, which is burning and scalding. So that's nothing pleasant, and that is the just consequence to be sent to the wicked. His roots below dry up, and his branches cut off above. Job earlier expressed his envy for the tree, in that you can cut it down to the stump, and then it still has life in it, and he compares the human life to that of a flower in the field. It instantly evaporates. It is here one day, and then gone the next, vanished, never to return again. But here, if the tree is... if the roots are dry, that means that that's a source of their life. So wherever there are roots, there is hope for a tree to grow from the roots. But the root is the source of life. It is the thing which go underneath the ground from which the tree gets much of its sustenance and nutrients. And without the roots there, then the tree is no more. If you sever a tree at the roots, that means it is there's no life form left. And remembrance of him perishes from the earth, and he has no name on the street. So this is nothing to look forward to have no memory, to have no one to preserve your memory and dignity in life after you are gone, to have no... And Job was childless. He had 10 children. They went away, but he is eventually restored twofold. So he would escape this curse, but for all present... the forecast was that he would die childless, and he had no possessions, but those are restored twofold too. but this is certainly an incentive not to succumb to wickedness, the fear that you would lose everything that you had and have no one to live after you and no one to preserve your memory. They thrust him from light into darkness and chase him out of the world. So the world is your enemy when you are wicked. You will have no friends, and you will be thrust out and expelled into darkness, which is analogous to death, sickness, and hell, and also ignorance and confusion. But you will be chased out of the world. You will have no life, because on this world we have a life, but once you are gone from it, Job is a little ambiguous as to the resurrection. He does express faith for it in the 19th chapter. He leaves no offspring or descendants among his people, nor any survivor in his dwelling. So I probably said much of what I could have saved for now after the 17th verse, but to have no offspring is to have no remembrance. That's to have no lingering legacy of a man who once was. We are perpetuated and made immortal through our children and their children and their children, and through our progeny. And Abraham was blessed with the nations that sprung from his loins. But Job, for all present forecasts, the outcome did not look so good. Eventually, we read that he sired 20 children, twofold of the 10 he previously lost on the same day. And I just want you to imagine the loss of if you have a son or a daughter or a loved one, and just the emotional trauma of that. But to lose 10 in a single day all at once, and in addition to your health and wealth, is just beyond the pale of reasonable comparison. Those in the west are astonished at his day, and those in the east are frightened. So west to the east, that means everywhere he goes, wherever you go in the earth, and that combination is one way. Elsewhere we read that as the lightning shineth in the east, and as the lightning shineth in the west, east and even shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And we also read that as far as the east is from the west, he shall remove our transgressions from us, in Psalm 103:13 or somewhere thereabouts. But wherever he goes, you're going to be astonished, you're going to be a figure of ridicule, and people are going to look at you astonished, much as Job's 3 friends did when they saw him with homeless, just on a property with no livestock, and just on a hill in sackcloth and ashes, and having lost everything at once. That's what Job would be wherever he went from this point forward, was the implicit assumption of that argument. 21st and final verse, indeed, such are the dwellings of the perverse, and this is the place of him who does not know El. So the home is where they belong, and people who do not desire the principles or the kingdom of heaven on earth will be out of place. They will not be home in the kingdom which awaits us, the kingdom of heaven. But the dwelling place, hell, is a fitting place for the perverse, and its existence is necessitated by the character of those who inhabit it. And to be ignorant of El means you are lost in the darkness, you have no reliable guide, you have no moral compass, you have no understanding of the heavenly perspective, which can give illumination to the things on earth. And to live life apart from even knowledge in the one who created you is no way to live at all, and it leads nowhere good. So everyone is a monotheist by inclination. It's just a self-selected resistance to the concept that compels many people to remove God from their lives. They can't get rid of him, though. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.